Okay, hello everybody. My name is Aaron Stannard, and I'm going to be doing the community stand up by myself today. So, we haven't done a huge amount of new releases since last month's pretty significant Akadana release. Gregorius, who's normally my co host here with me today, is out of the office this week. So, he'll be back with us in July. So I wanted to go through just a couple of items today. The first is taking a look at our Akka.net survey results and talking a bit about how this is going to influence our roadmap for some of our future plans. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of kick off by taking a look at our survey results initially. Okay, let me go ahead and make this full screen. In fact, just to make this a little bit easier to read, I'm going to go ahead and shift to only showing our presentation content. Okay, I think that should go ahead and do it. Um, in fact, you know what? What I might do to make this a little bit easier, let me go ahead and just stop sharing that. And I'm going to add, if I scroll down here real quick, I am going to just share this window and see if this is a little bit easier to read. Yeah, looks like it to me. Let me go ahead and zoom in a bit. Okay, so we had roughly 145 answers for our Akadana user survey. And what we try to learn each year when we do this is we're basically trying to kind of understand what are some of the things we could be doing better to support our end users. So these are the raw survey results we got back from MailChimp. And a lot of what the answers here kind of pertain to how things have gone since the Akadana 1.5 release. Um, and we've also wanted to kind of understand what are some of the things we could be generally doing better. So the bulk of respondents who responded to us in the survey are probably closer to being Akka.net fans than they are being, let's say, people who are just kind of casually interested in it. So keep that bias in mind as we're taking a look at these answers. So bulk of these users responded that they're in production, and a bunch of them are trying to get into production right now. Let's take a look at some of the reasons. We're not going to go through all of them on why users might still be, trying to get on board. So we've seen this type of answer quite a bit that management doesn't understand the benefit of having actors. So there's a lot of instances where there's users who are champions of Aki.net who need some help making the sales pitch to their technical and product leadership on why they may not currently be using Akka.net. So this is something that we should be helping users do by making some maybe stronger like business case type arguments on the website. Licensing changes around Akka.net. I actually emailed this user back. I think he's got Akka.net and Akka confused. So that's already kind of addressed with that. Missing support of .NET Standard or .NET 6. I couldn't follow up with this user because I think they applied anonymously, but we do support .NET 6 dual targeting right now. So I think they're confused, or maybe they mean they can't support this at their business, which again, Akka.net supports .NET Standard 2.0, so that should work all the way back to .NET 4.61. And let's see. Some folks have found Microsoft Orleans and the virtual actor pattern easier to use. That's something that we should address. I think in a lot of cases, this is a result of us basically not making a compelling case. The truth is that Akka.net is actually a lot easier to use than Orleans is in a lot of contexts. But we probably haven't done the best job communicating that. So these bits of feedback are very useful to us, and they all kind of point to. I scroll down here, they all kind of point to basically a general theme that we've kind of discerned from some of our answers, which is that generally speaking, the learning curve and the documentation and the tutorials and the examples are probably the biggest barrier to adoption for Akka.net right now. Even more important than performance, even more important than other doodads like supporting AOT and other types of issues. It comes down to kind of the teachability of the framework and I think that's also closely related to how easy it is to sell to leadership. In terms of which parts of Akadot do people use, basically there's a fair amount of Akadot remote and Akadot cluster and Akadot persistence users. And then actually surprisingly, a fair amount of people who are starting to use Akadot hosting. One of the things that we've certainly seen show up in some of the feedback on the survey so far, and we'll see this a bit later, is there's a lot of people who are very happy with Aquanaut hosting, and that has certainly made a big impact on their user experience. So we'll get to that in just a minute. Which versions of Akka.net do people use? Still got a couple of people running on Akka.net 1.1. That product came out, I think, in either early 2016 or yeah, I think it was early 2016. So yeah, I guess there's still people rolling with that. Akka.net 1.2, a handful of Akka.net 3, and a lot of Akka.net 1.4 and 1.5 users. So Akka.net 1.4 came out, I think, 2020, I think early 2020 did, and then this came out 3 years. Akadata 1.5 came out 3 years later, so that's great. We've got a lot of people who are upgrading. Um, we have some questions we're going to look at a little bit further down that basically deal with why haven't you upgraded yet. So we'll take a look at some of those answers. Which runtimes are you currently running Akka.net? We've asked this question every year, and we've definitely seen a lot of movement off of .NET Framework and on to basically .NET Core, which is good. But as you can see, there's still a pretty decent sized cohort of people that are still using .NET Framework. This comes down, in my opinion, to this is like an organizational and a cultural issue by and large, where organizations that are still running on these older versions of .NET Framework are basically kind of bought in on the if it ain't broke, don't fix it. .NET Framework is still working okay for them. They probably don't care that much about performance, and they're probably still using other older technologies like ASP.NET MVC, for instance, and not using any of the new .NET Core technologies. I think this is eventually going to catch up with these companies, particularly as issues like security vulnerabilities and other types of problems stop getting patched for these versions of .NET that are going to fall out of support in the future. So I hope to see a little bit more movement towards upgrading to the newer versions of .NET. Uh, I have a very selfish reason for doing that, which is I personally, and so do the other members of the Akka.NET contribution team, we would basically like to stop supporting some of the older versions of the .NET runtime, so that way we can get more focused on taking advantage of some of the newer programming constructs that are available inside .NET Core and .NET 6, .NET 7. This will be useful from a performance perspective. Will also allow us to take advantage of, let's say, some newer libraries for doing things like Socket.io, and will allow us to ultimately, I think, make Akka.net a little bit more robust in the grand scheme of things. Worth pointing out that frameworks like ASP.NET and Orleans don't really support .NET Framework very much anymore. They're more or less kind of bought in on always targeting the newest version of .NET with each of their major releases. Um, that being said, there still are a lot of libraries in the .NET ecosystem that do target .NET Standard and do support older frameworks too. For instance, all of the Microsoft .extensions libraries. What architectural patterns and approaches do you implement with Akka.NET today? I guess I really shouldn't be surprised. There's a huge number of CQRS users. I just got done doing an online training today where we spent a couple of hours focusing on this event sourcing, event streaming, transactional outbooks pattern. Not really used all that much with Akka.net by the looks of it. That kind of makes sense to me. This is really more of like a CRUD plus message queue system. So this is something you might do if you're building like a Rabbit MQ application. With Akka persistence and so forth, you don't really need as much of this. So I'm not totally surprised there. Lots of pub sub, lots of domain driven design. My guess is there's some other architectural patterns like vertical slice and ports and adapters that we probably should have included on our questions here. If I scroll down here, we've got our sort of net promoter score. How likely are you to refer Akka.net to a friend or colleague? Uh, Basically, we have a fairly sizable chunk of people that are all net promoters, 8 or higher, which is fantastic. The person who submitted a 2 is the same one who was confused about our license change. So I can kind of throw that outlier out. And you do expect some people who've tried the framework and weren't fond of it as well. So ultimately, we'd like to get obviously everybody to go ahead and give us a 10, even though that's not really necessarily feasible. An 8.8 average rating is pretty dang good, though. So I feel good about that. Lots of net promoters. Now we're going to kind of start getting into upgrade questions. Have you upgraded to Akka.NET 1.5 or used it in a project yet? Roughly 60% of people have upgraded to Akka.NET 1.5 or have used it, and 40% have not. Now, if we get down to why haven't you upgraded to Akka.NET 1.5, what are the possible answers we get back? Well, basically, this As this user said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. This user said the upgrade's already planned, just haven't prioritized it yet. I am just lazy. That seems funny. Again, licensing changes that users confused. Um, if I scroll down here and the process of upgrading not finished, waiting for a new project, haven't had a chance to study it. Um, this user, I think, left us a detailed answer about a breaking change that got introduced in 1.4. I think that's been fixed, so I replied back to them. Otherwise, yeah, a couple of users are just being generally conservative. So this is that sort of philosophy of waiting until, let's say, after you want to wait until like the point 3 release before you upgrade. So you got a lot of users doing that. That's pretty standard in enterprise programming. We fixed a fair number of issues that were found in Akadot 1.5 already. So I think that should no longer be a bit of a problem. Now, if we take a look at some of the feedback from users who've upgraded to Akadot 1.5, lots of speed improvements. Um, Too much sugar to replace the old 1.4 way to the new 1.5 way. Need more documentation. This user said they haven't tested it yet. Hard to get new developers started because the basic concepts are so different from normal code. Design and architecture is hard to get started on. This kind of sounds like general feedback about Akadana overall, not necessarily about the 1.5 upgrade. That's fine. Documentation on how to set up Akka management and Akka Discovery Azure is not great. Requires digging for examples of some experimentation. So this is something we're going to dovetail into when we talk about the documentation overall. So I'll get into that in a moment. That feedback's totally valid though. So we do need to address that. Let's see. Now that it's no longer OSS, won't be able to use it. Man, this user's really got to read our blog. we've we've I couldn't be any clearer about the fact that that is a Lightband issue and not us. But okay. No Hocon is a nice feature. I hope to be able to incorporate Akka management and persistence, but working with oracles, we'll see. Let's see. This is something we want to fix in Akka.NET 1.6. Fixing this is the system dispatcher we want to fix here. Configuration of Akka management and clustering is not straightforward for multiple services, so we do need to do a lot more work on that. Disappointed you still have to provide production ready new serializers. It's still JSON.NET. Yes, we do need to fix that. Let's see. Easy migration. Still some trouble with DI. Supported .NET 6 is what we needed to progress. Long awaited. Some questions about Akaling. Notice the consistent performance improvement is exactly what we needed. Some people still want typed actors, etc. Let's see. Comment from Christopher Rowe. I need to integrate with NetNet standard DLL, so part of my system still needs 1.4. Is it possible to exchange messages between 1.5 actors and 1.4 actors? Yes, Christopher, absolutely you can. The wire format isn't any different at all between those two. The only thing you wouldn't necessarily be able to do all that easily would be if you were using cluster sharding and some of those entity actors for inside one shard region had to be on 1.4 and 1.5. That may not necessarily be feasible if you were using any of the new state management features and knock it out at 1.5 for cluster sharding. However, if you're still using the same defaults that were available in 1.4, that actually should work correctly. So I think you should be available. I replied to Andreas here. We actually did fix that. MongoDB runs just fine. I knock it out at 1.5. Let's see. Um, want some more improvements around testability for unit testing actors. Basically, improvements on the performance stuff. Upgrade was easy. Some of the compile issues for the changing of stream syncs, now returning test.done was a bit of a pain. Yeah, that was one set of breaking API changes we did make. Performance improvements are really nice. Like to see some of the static variables like self and context go as they're fragile async code. Yes, I would definitely like to get rid of those too. I'm planning for Akadot at 1.6 to kind of refactor the way the actor cell and the way we do mailbox processing to work to kind of be a little bit more natively async. We do have like one outstanding issue there where the context of an async actor can, in theory, get lost when you're awaiting. That refactoring would also help address some of these problems as well. I agree with that. Akka hosting. Let's see. Have you migrated an existing application to use Akka hosting for configuration or started a greenfield project that uses it? So this answer is, I think, select all that apply. So actually, no, it is select one at a time. So we've had a lot of people, about 35% already try Akka hosting. Another 53.4% are planning on migrating. And then we've got, I guess, about 11% of people that are not going to use it. So these are people who are either happy with Hokon or don't really see what the purpose of it is. Overwhelmingly, seems like Akada hosting has been received very positively, though. Any general feedback about Akka hosting? Simplifies the deployment. Going to replace our homegrown boilerplate. Wants more documentation. I'll get to that at the end. More documentation would be fantastic. Made configuration way easier, much easier to use, much simpler. Made Akka.NET feel much more like a native .NET library. Much better. Evaluating it along with Orleans. Setup in Orleans is definitely easier. Disagree with that. Um, but um, but maybe let's see. No experience with Akka hosting yet. More documentation examples. I'll get to that piece of feedback at the end. I'll go ahead and keep scrolling here. I think someone mentioned, yeah, good developer experience upgrade. I'm going to go ahead and basically say that Akka hosting overall has been a pretty resounding success with most of our users, as you can see by the number of people that want to migrate to it. This was direct. Akka hosting was directly sort of created as a result of the feedback that we got in our 2022 survey, and also a couple of years before that as well. Hokon was one of the things that people frequently complained about in the Akka user experience. We listened, we tried to make it better, and I think we've done that. Another thing people complained about was Lighthouse. When you're using Akka cluster, Akka management was something that Ishmael Hamid on the sort of Akka.NET like contributors team had started working on independently. Gregorius on the Pettibridge team kind of took it over and delivered sort of what you see and get now today is kind of a finished project. Um, Overall, I think the feedback on Akka management has been that it is a big improvement over Lighthouse, but it's still a little awkward to configure it, and it needs better documentation. That's been my impression. The people who've gotten it up and running are very happy with it, but a lot of people spent a lot more time than they would have liked trying to figure out how to configure that. So I think that's something that we need to improve on. I asked for some feedback about the reliable delivery feature we're working on. So it looks like overall people were kind of interested in using it. We'll see how that goes. I've gotten some feedback from users who've used it so far, and that's been positive. But I think most people haven't gotten around to adopting it yet. So that's that. We asked some questions about a new project that we're going to be talking about soon. How interested are you in using it? It kind of runs the gamut here over a pretty broad spectrum. One bit of feedback that we've gotten from users with respect to building like a web app for being able to kind of manage Akka.NET. It's basically like an Akka cluster dashboard. One bit of feedback that we've gotten pretty frequently is users want an air gapped solution for running it. So, meaning they wouldn't necessarily be open to a software as a service style solution. So, that's something that we are going to consider. I had some questions about pricing. Looks like overwhelmingly people who are using Akka cluster would be okay with paying 99 bucks a month for like a premium tier on this thing, provided that they got a demo of it and it worked correctly, etc. So we'll see how that goes. Now if I scroll down here, we talked about starting work on Akka.NET 1.6 in late 2023 or late fall of 2023. We're probably going to be moving the deadline on this to 2024 as part of our documentation plans. I'm going to go ahead and go on to explain that in just a minute. But a lot of people are interested in the high performance and adopting .NET 8. I do worry a little bit about our users who are running on .NET Framework, basically deciding the easier thing to do is just to stay put there and not upgrade at all. That would create some potential friction for us. We ideally would like everybody to go ahead and move on to the new version, but people have got to be bought in on the .NET Core release train, which has been around now since 2017. I understand people being skeptical about it back then, but really, at the very least, since like .NET Core 3.1 and especially with .NET 6, I think it'd be a really good idea for people to just get on board and start trying to upgrade. Obviously, I like to support everybody, but trying to do things like improve performance and improve serialization is a lot harder if we have to keep going back to .NET Framework as well. So that's something I'm a little reticent about. So we'll see. Um, if you can't or won't upgrade your Akadana applications to .NET 8 in the future, can you please tell us why? So this might shed some color on that. Unfortunately, there might be restrictions that have to be checked as it might influence other software and due to usage of blah blah blah. So basically, it's they would like to do it. There's a lot of of externalities that have to be factored in. Some applications still on .NET Framework. We only run on LTS releases. .NET 8 will be LTS, so that should factor that in there. Um, I'd very much prefer .NET Standard 2.1 instead. That still doesn't give us access, by the way, to a lot of libraries we want to use, in particular for things like system.memory access in some of the I/O APIs is a bit of an issue there. And there's other kind of problems that come along with it. Maybe we could do .NET Standard 2.1. Maybe that would be a good compromise. I'll have to take a bit of a look at that. And let's see, I won't go through all these other answers necessarily, but long story short, older dependencies, older stuff that's going on. So Ockling F sharp version, that's come up in a couple of the other libraries that's come up in some of the other feedback about Ockling. One thing that I wanted that was on the kind of original roadmap for Akka.NET 1.5 that we ultimately dropped is honestly building a better native F sharp experience in the core Akata F sharp library. Um, basically, I have a lot of F sharp experience working on our build system, but that's about it. That's not the same as maintaining, a production grade F sharp library and understanding, let's say, all of the native F sharp idioms. And the other, Gregorius and the other members of our team are all C sharp developers primarily. So we don't really have a lot of in house experience to be a good judge on this. I think the Akaling library has been very popular, and a lot of users have enjoyed working with it. And I think there's some benefit to that project kind of existing outside of the main Akka.NET project. It allows for a lot more innovation and changes and support for features that may not natively exist inside the core Akka.NET library. We're kind of beholden to some tighter restrictions around backwards compatibility guarantees and feature parity with C sharp, etc. So Octoling has access to things, for instance, like F sharp typed actor references. So I kind of feel like we should offer a better first party solution for F sharp in Akka.NET, but I don't really want to cannibalize the healthy community around Ockling either. So I'm kind of open to some suggestions on things we could do to try to improve the core Akadata F sharp experience because there's clearly a need for it inside the project. The F sharp community has always been a big supporter of the Akka.NET project, and we should do more to try to support them as well from a first party perspective. So that's something else that we'll need to do. Now we're going to get more into kind of some of the training material. What training courses and topics appeal most to you? This was multiple choice, so people could select all the answers that applied. Um, overall, the high level things people want access to, it's less about learning the libraries and more about learning how do you model software with Akka.NET. What's the right approach for modeling domains and problems and architectures with actors? So what this kind of tells me is what much of what I've read elsewhere and some of the answers that are in this literature here, that a lot of what people want support for from the Akadana project has a lot more to do with being able to basically learn how to apply. It's not syntax, it's design, it's concepts, it's learning how to deal with a paradigm shift of designing software with actors. I think a lot of the feedback, for instance, on Orleans being easier than Akka.NET, for instance, objectively, Orleans actually makes you deal with a lot more infrastructure and a lot more, we'll just call it general crap up front than Akka.NET does. You're buying into building a distributed system from day one with Orleans. With Akka.NET, you can do a lot of work in process and not have to deal with any infrastructure aside from the Akka DLL. The fact that there's this perception that Orleans is easier is because we are not doing a very effective job with some users, in my opinion, being able to go ahead and make the actor model and some of the concepts that are fundamental to being successful with Akka.net accessible to those end users. That is also reflected in the types of courses that people are recommending we put front and center with Akka.net. Now, bear in mind the bias of the audience who's filling this out. These are the people who are the biggest fans of Akka.net, who are saying that we need to do a better job or really put more material out there about making Akka.net application design easier. So, if people who are big fans of Akka.net saying this, imagine all the people who didn't choose to use Akka.net. They're probably even more strongly in favor of putting these concepts out there front and center. So this tells me that we need to go and revisit Akka.net Bootcamp and a lot of the sort of fundamentals around not just Akka.net, not just Akka.net syntax, but also the sort of belt and suspenders type work people want to do around how do you actually model a domain with actors? What's the right way to go about doing that? If I scroll down here, there's some of the other feedback. So learning a bit more about dependency injection, learning how to integrate Akka.net with Kubernetes, learning how to integrate it with, let's say, other technologies like gRPC, entity framework, applying DDD, and so forth. Couple of bits of feedback about community stand-ups. So I'm going to be hitting up some of the people who said yes to this to do some community stand-up presentations for us. We haven't had someone outside of Petabridge do a community stand-up presentation since January, and that's largely been because we have actually had a lot of stuff to present ourselves. So we're going to start reaching out to some of the people who applied yes to this and trying to get them to present about their companies. Um, let's see if so apparently we need to advertise Phobos to this user because we definitely do support that. Let's see. Other things that we could be doing better: documentation, updating data changes to the GUI is easy. We need some way to kind of have a non-actor subscription mechanism. I'm actually doing stuff like this, what this user's talking about, using Akka streams and IAsync enumerable today. That will be another thing we should probably encapsulate into a training course, how to use Akka streams to kind of expose Akka activity in a non-Akka way. Let's see. An Akka boilerplate framework might be helpful. So we did release our Akka.net new templates earlier this year, but they're not very well integrated with the rest of our documentation and tutorials. That's a problem as well. More open source examples, more hello world examples, documentation, hard to configure. Probably need more documentation tutorials there. Improve the documentation, especially around testing. I'm sure you've heard this, but the documentation needs to be upgraded. On demand training rather than live courses, documentation, Akka.net configuration. Again, this is actually a documentation complaint. Link to videos from your YouTube channel with matching content. Your videos are excellent. It should be visible there too. Good news is I can actually fix that relatively quickly. But if I scroll through this list, and this list goes on for a while, it is going to be documentation is going to be the thing that we need to improve. Stuff that we're doing really well: performance, um, basically reactive systems, release quality is top notch, interaction with the community, communication on Discord. Thank you, the user, for telling us that you like the documentation. We appreciate that. We do try. Support's amazing. Documentation needs some work. Communicating, product development, support you provide, communication with the community, etc. Great community support. Code quality is hard. Love Akka hosting. Akka works very well and is well designed. Um, and I won't go through all of this, but the basic sum of most of the feedback that we've heard from users is that the actual quality of the library is great. The performance improvements are great. The responsiveness to the community is great. And generally, the level of support that we provide in Discord is really good. But the areas of feedback where we can do better are mostly centered around learning curve and documentation. which both of those are related, by the way. There are some things we can do with respect to the framework itself to help improve the learning curve. One really good example of that would be introducing typed actor references, which we do have plans to do in the future. That would help the cohesion of reading the code base a lot better. That would help with debuggability. That would probably also help with, let's say, just generally speaking, reducing the surface area for mistakes and errors inside Akka.net. That's certainly something we could do. But I think overall, the feedback I've drawn, and this kind of leads me into talking a bit about what we're going to be doing for the rest of this year with respect to Akka.net. We're going to be doing a couple of significant changes. First, we are going to have some product announcements from Petabridge coming up. We kind of hinted at that inside the survey. So be on the lookout for those. That is something that we are actively working on right now. We actually have a couple of things we're working on in there. But the big things that we're going to be investing in are responding to our users' feedback about our Akka.net training material and the documentation on the website. So, the first big thing I'm going to mention is that I just finished doing my last round of live webinar trainings last week. We are going to be retiring those. We're not going to be offering our live webinar training courses anymore. And instead, what we're going to be doing is, I think one user mentioned they wanted on-demand training courses, kind of like a plural site format almost. We're actually going to be going down the road of doing that, and we're going to make the vast majority of those courses all available for free. All you'll have to do is basically sign up on our website, and it'll go ahead and allow you to basically go through, complete these courses. We'll probably provide some certificates of completion for some of those as well. And we're going to basically kind of start there by revisiting and refreshing Akka.net boot camps where we're going to begin. And then our traditional remoting, clustering, and design patterns courses, we will also make that material all available for free as sort of a, um, what's it called? A MOOC, MOCC, one of those kind of online. I don't remember what the acronym even stands for anymore, but basically kind of an online learning center. We're going to make all that material available for free. And we're going to redo the Petabridge website as part of that project there. So that's going to be kind of a fairly significant effort. We're going to be working on that. In parallel with that, I think even though we did a pretty big redesign of the Akka.net website last year, I think that now that we have a whole bunch of really valuable APIs that are sort of outside of the central Akka.net repository, this includes Akka hosting, this includes Akka management, this includes the Alpaca project where we have all those Akka streams connectors. We really need to rethink how we do the documentation on the main Akka.net website as well. So we're probably going to redesign all of that from scratch. I'm not sure if well, let me rephrase that. Um, there's a lot of the Akadana documentation that's pretty good that we're going to keep. So, for instance, our pages that kind of outline all the different configuration settings, all the pages that kind of talk a little bit about, let's say, how to work with customizing the serialization system, how to work with cluster sharding. Those are all pretty good. We're going to keep them. The bulk of the material on the main Akadana website, though, is either material that was originally ported basically from the original Akka project, and that was ported like 6 years ago. So a lot of it is no longer relevant. On top of it, it was kind of written in this like Swedish dialect of English, a lot of that stuff. So we're going to go through and rewrite that. We're going to rewrite it in sort of simpler form. I would really like to be able to embed runnable examples directly on the website, either using Replit, which I've been using for. In fact, do I have an example of Replit around here I can pull up? Um, well, that's not really relevant, but would like to be able to go ahead and embed some runnable examples on the website, especially for concepts that can be explained in a really small space. A good example of that would be Akka Streams and showing what all the different stages do, for instance. That would be a good example of something we'd want to have on the website that could be runnable. We're going to do that. And then we're also going to probably reorganize all of our public samples and code into a kind of singular repository where if you want to look at a really big sample, you're not going to need to necessarily jump between a bunch of different personal repos that I have or repos in the Petabridge organization or repos in the Akadana organization. We're going to try to move everything into a single place. My guess is it'll probably be the Petabridge Akka.net code samples repository, because that already has a pretty large number of watchers and a large number of stars on it. We'll probably go ahead and consolidate everything into that repo. So our examples for how to run Akka.net on Azure App Service, on container apps, and all that stuff, we're probably going to go ahead and move all of that into a single repository. That way, it'll be easier to discover and find what's there. And part and parcel with that, we're going to reorganize the documentation. So as a result of this, we've decided that we're going to move the time frame for starting Akka.net 1.6 back to next year. And we're going to address the immediate issues around tutorials, documentation, and examples. I really, as a kind of part of our philosophy with Petabridge as a company and also as an open source organization, our core mission and values is really kind of excellence above all else, and recognizing that our customers are people like us who are solving similar problems to us. Um, the fact that so many people have brought up documentation and the learning curve and teachability as sort of the core problems that are maybe either affecting them from being effective with Akka.net, or stopping their managers from approving the use of Akka.net, or maybe even stopping them from using Akka.net in a way they feel confident with in production, or maybe it stops them from being able to learn how to test Akka.net. These are all examples of, let's say, things I'm really responsive to, because it means that that's an area where we aren't living up to our promise of excellence there. So we're going to address that first. Of course, I care about being able to jump in and fix performance problems and take advantage of new APIs and improve the speed of Akka.net Remote and other sort of critical areas of Akka.net. My inner sort of, let's say, systems programming nerd cares very deeply about all this stuff. But none of that is relevant if people are having a lot of trouble learning how to take advantage of all the great work we've already put out there in public. So myself and Gregorius, and let's say the whole Petabridge organization as a whole, so the members of our team, have basically decided that we think taking stock of our learning materials and making those publicly available, and honestly changing our business model a little bit, is kind of part and parcel of this as well. Charging for trainings is kind of how we started Petabridge back in 2015. And back when Akka.net was brand new, there weren't any Pluralsight courses on it, and there wasn't a lot available on the internet you could go look at to get information on how to run it. There weren't even a lot of Stack Overflow questions back then. That's how things were in 2015 when we first started Petabridge. These days, a lot of the stuff that we teach in our training courses, um, the information is still really valuable, and it's still really useful to have a live instructor who can answer questions for you. But our business model is basically shifting a lot more towards, let's say, paid products like Phobos, or our support plans, and maybe our consulting services. And group trainings are still really popular as well, where you want to bring a group of software developers all at the same company up to speed all at once. We'll continue to do all of those, but I think retiring our online trainings and moving them all towards an on-demand format that is free and widely accessible by our users will ultimately probably help grow Petabridge as a business a lot more, and will ultimately probably make Akka.net a much more accessible and widely adopted technology. Don't get me wrong, Akka.net's adoption and numbers look fantastic, but we always want to keep our eye on what can we do to kind of expand our user base, and what can we do to kind of serve our users a lot more. And I think focusing on our materials for training and education, and helping users understand how to get the most out of the framework, is probably the right place for us to put our effort right now. So, what you're going to be seeing from us over the next, let's say, couple of quarters, we're probably not going to be doing as much, let's say, brand new feature development. We are, of course, going to continue to respond to bug reports and issues that people raise in Discord. We always do our normal maintenance cycles. So, we're going to be doing all of that work still, of course. But most of our effort on net new product development is going to be largely concentrated on improving our documentation and improving our tutorials and making it easier for users to get answers to their questions. So that's the feedback that we kind of got from we've gotten feedback about our documentation every year. Um, but we've decided that basically kind of getting rid of the online live webinar training models is probably the right thing for us to do for our business, and also to kind of help improve the overall, let's say, I guess, feature adoption of the Akadonic community. And we always want to be really responsive to what people tell us. And the overwhelming feedback we got in this in our essay this year, on our survey this year, is that the improvements we made around usability for Akka.net 1.5 and Akka hosting and Akka management are all very much appreciated. But the outstanding challenge most of our users face is still learning how to use these tools properly and learning how to make them easier. So that's what we're going to be focusing on for the next couple of quarters. As a result, we're probably going to push Akka.net 1.6 out to next year. But my guess is, based off the types of feedback we've been getting, this will probably do a lot more for our users, for our community, and also for Petibridge as a business overall, than working on performance issues will right now. We're still, of course, going to try to do some of that anyway, since we're always working on those types of issues behind the scenes. But that's going to be what's our key focus going forward for the next couple of quarters. Um, if you have suggestions for certain courses you would like seen, obviously I've got a lot of info in that survey that we just showed, but feel free to send me a direct message on Twitter or in Discord, or feel free to send me an email at aaron@petibridge.com. If you've had questions that you couldn't get a good answer to on the internet, or things you feel like the Akadana documentation didn't explain adequately, or maybe you felt like this facet of Akadana Bootcamp was really dated and we should go through and replace it, all of that type of feedback would be super useful for us, because that's exactly the type of issues that we're going to start addressing here. We're probably going to be focusing on wrapping up some of the work on these products that we're trying to ship right now. So that's kind of what we're working on for the next couple of months. But in part and parcel with that, we're actually starting the process of outlining all the changes that are going to be going into our documentation, tutorials, and training going forward. That's all going to be kind of our next big project that we're going to be undertaking. So I want to thank everyone for their time today. This was this was a lot for me to kind of go through in terms of all the survey results. But this is kind of part of how we keep moving the ball forward and improving things inside our framework and inside all the other libraries that kind of are built around Akka.net. And we couldn't do this without users like you giving us really good, honest, constructive feedback about what we could do to improve your experience even more. And I also want to thank, in particular, all of the users who are in our Discord, who are giving us feedback and asking questions and reporting bugs. That is the most useful tool for me to kind of understand what we could be doing better on an ongoing sort of perpetual basis. Uh, you help a lot every time you contribute and speak up in there. So thank you for letting us know about problems, what we could be doing better, and how we can better support you. So thank you very much for your time today. I'm going to go ahead and close this out here. But thank you, and I'll catch you next month. And if you went ahead and volunteered to potentially do a show and tell presentation, you should expect to hear from me in the next couple of weeks. So thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.